Hello and welcome back to the Nonstop Podcast. My name is Erica and I'm your host. On today's show, I brought the beautiful Keriann Long to the show, and we are going to discuss the benefits and the challenges of emotional attachment styles. Next Up Nonstop is a lifestyle and travel podcast that promotes the importance of traveling and mental wellness for millennial women. We discuss everything from travel to dating and careers to mental health. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for entertainment purposes only. All right, let's get into it. So, Keriann, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to the Next Stop Nonstop family?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Erica. So I'm Keriann. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm also a dating and relationship coach. I've been helping people improve their relationships and navigate their way through dating for over 10 years now. So
I
love to be able to help people with that.
Wonderful. All right. Well, let's get into the juicy stuff. The reason why we're here, right?
Mhm.
All righty. So, what is emotional attachment? Let's start there.
Yeah, so there's this idea that there are these main ways that we attach to one another in relationships. And originally, the study of this was based around the way that children attach to their caregivers. And then later research got into how the same principles of attachment seem to also be relevant to the way adults interact with each other in romantic relationships. So yeah, that's a little bit about the kind of where it comes from and what it is. And so the way that shows up in romantic relationships is we see that there are kind of 3 to 4 primary ways of people relating to each other in relationships. And I know we're going to get into some more detail about what that is.
For sure. Okay, wonderful. So what is the difference between emotional attachment and love?
So there are these different attachment styles, and they are ways that we relate to one another. And love is more, I don't know, that's a challenging question. Actually, I've never really thought about that before. Love is more the experience, I guess, of feeling attached to someone. So people with all kinds of different emotional attachment styles can experience love.
Okay. I like that answer, though. What's the difference between emotional attachment and emotional connection, if there is a difference?
Emotional attachment and emotional connection. I kind of think of them as being the same thing. And again, like with the different styles of attachment, people will experience connection in different ways.
Let's start here. So what are the different attachment styles?
Sure. So the 3 main ones are secure attachment, avoidant attachment, and anxious attachment. And then there's also a mix of anxious and avoidant that it's often referred to as disorganized, which I don't really love that. So I refer them to it more as a mix between anxious and avoidant.
Okay, well, wonderful. So let's actually get into each of those. So let's start with the secure attachment. What are the benefits and the challenges of a secure attachment, and what are the traits of it?
So securely attached people have a lot of skills that make navigating relationships really easy. So securely attached people, I'll start with traits, and I feel like that will kind of move us into benefits and challenges. So securely attached people are they're easily loving and easily connecting to other people. They're comfortable with committed relationships. They're comfortable talking about relationships. They're comfortable navigating conflict in relationships. Basically, all of the things that you could think of are like as signs of a healthy relationship. Usually a securely attached person has those qualities.
Okay.
So there aren't really any challenges to being securely attached. It's mostly all benefits. The only challenges that I can really think of are that a securely attached person is going to be unlikely to, they might be frustrated or impatient with behaviors that aren't securely attached because they're willing to show up in a relationship in that way, and if somebody else is not willing to show up in a relationship in that way, they might feel frustrated that the other person doesn't have the ability to show up in the same
To
kind of
do
way.
that. That makes sense. So what are the traits of an avoidant attachment style?
Sure. So people with an avoidant attachment style really, really value their independence. So
Mm,
connection is harder for them because
okay.
they may have had experiences before or just have a belief that connection is going to mean giving up their independence, that
Mm.
they're going to get smothered, they're not going to
Mhm.
have any time to themselves, they're going to only have to compromise, and they're
Yeah.
going to lose everything that they like about being on their own. So, so they tend to keep their distance in
Mhm.
relationships. They tend to kind of put walls up, feel kind of suffocated when people are coming too close to them. They sometimes will hold on to the idea of this perfect partner that they can never quite find.
Yeah.
So every person that they date is not quite good enough or has this
Mhm.
one little flaw that they just can't accept. And it's like they could find fault with anyone and
Yeah.
anything. So there's always this just, if I can find fault with you, then I can kind of keep you at a distance.
Very interesting. When you say that, I'm like, there's some people to come to mind for that.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. And so our next one is actually the anxious attachment style.
Mhm.
I'm curious about this one because I think this might be me. So let's
Okay.
start with the traits first.
Yes. So anxious attachment is some traits of anxious attachment are folks who they really value relationships. So it's
Yeah.
kind of the opposite of avoidantly attached folks. They really value relationships. They really prioritize relationships.
Mhm.
And they tend to have some pretty big mindset challenges around relationships.
Okay.
So they're always on the lookout for signs that somebody might want to leave them or no longer
Mhm.
be interested in them anymore. So there's kind of like a hyper awareness of those kinds of things.
Got it.
If they sense anything like that, they tend to do things that are called protest behaviors, which is kind of withdraw in reaction to a fear that someone might be withdrawing from them.
Mhm.
What are some other things? They can be perceived as needy because they like a lot of connection and a lot of
Mhm.
attention. And sometimes another kind of protest behavior is reaching out a lot for connection, which,
Yeah.
especially if you're dating someone who's avoidant, tends to push that
Yeah.
person further away.
I can imagine that. This is very interesting. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So there's this little dance that happens back and forth between anxious and avoidant people.
Yeah.
What else are some traits of anxiously attached folks? Those are the main things that come to
Okay.
mind.
I love it. Okay, so I know you were saying that those are three main. So let's kind of talk
Yes.
about that mix that you said that was an
Yes.
avoidant fearful, or like the mix of the anxious and the avoidant.
Yes. So one way that it's referred to is as disorganized, and another way of people talking about it is fearful avoidant.
Hmm.
But I just like to, because it's simplest for me to think about this way, I just think of a mix between anxious and avoidant. So
Okay.
at times they show up in anxious ways, and at
Hmm.
times they show up in avoidant ways and have kind of qualities of both.
Interesting. Okay. So
Mhm.
what are the benefits and the challenges of that specific attachment style?
Mm. Well, um, it's challenging because I think sometimes people who experience that can feel confused by their own experience.
Yeah.
So, especially if they know about anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, I've had people talk with me sometimes and say, I feel confused because in some situations I feel anxious, and then in these other situations or in these certain
Hmm.
times in my relationship, I feel avoidant, and
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to navigate that. So, and the other challenge is that they end up uh, engaging in a lot of push-pull with people, because when their anxious side gets activated, they want to be closer to someone and they want to connect with them. And then when something that happens that activates their avoidance side, then they start to push the person away. So the person who's in a relationship with them can also feel very confused about, where do I stand with you? What's going on here? Sometimes you seem so connected. Other times you're pushing me away. I don't understand.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so I hope you guys are getting some info because I definitely am. Alrighty, so which attachment styles actually work best together?
So the great thing about being securely attached is that you can be in a relationship with pretty much anyone, and anybody who's in a relationship with somebody who's securely attached tends to also become more securely attached themselves. So if you are single and you are dating and you find somebody who is securely attached, it's like hitting the jackpot, because it's going to be good all the way around. Like I said, sometimes securely attached people will get frustrated with the behaviors from people who aren't securely attached, but they tend to be more kind of patient, calm, and willing to navigate things more so than people who have quote unquote insecurely attached styles. So they can match well with anyone. Anxiously attached folks do definitely best with securely attached folks, because securely attached folks are going to help them to feel more secure. Avoidantly attached folks are going to push on all the things that make them anxious and likely make them more anxious. And unfortunately, anxiously attached and avoidantly attached people end up in relationships a lot of the time. They gravitate towards each other often. So it is possible to make a relationship work between those two styles, but it takes a lot of work on both people's parts, because both sides do things to trigger one another, and you really have to find a way how to work around that.
Interesting.
So yeah, secure is best for anxious folks, and avoidant folks also do best with secure. Secure is the number one.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah,
because secure folks are going to be most patient with an avoidance need for independence and space. They're not going to be triggered or activated by that. And the good news is that over 50% of people are securely attached. But people are always surprised when I say that, because
I was going to say.
because in the dating pool, like of the people who are single, that you are not going to find that 50% of people who are single are securely attached. Because
now there you go.
Yes, because securely attached people are more likely to be in a relationship already, and they're less likely to leave a relationship that they're in. So you have more avoidantly attached people who are single and in the dating pool. And so that's why when you're single, you will probably feel like you come across a lot of people who keep you at a distance, who aren't comfortable with commitment, who do this kind of push-pull thing. And I know that can be really frustrating.
Oh, for sure. So I guess in kind of going into that, what is the most common emotional attachment style? I know you were saying 50%, but is that necessarily, I guess that's basically half, but I guess, well, what would be the most common, I guess?
Yeah, so secure attachment is the most common. It's about 50%, and then about 25% of people are anxiously attached, and 25% of people are avoidantly attached. This research, I don't think accounted for the mix of anxiousness and avoidance. So I think they just separated those two out as best that they could. But if you look at those three, that's the breakdown between the three.
Okay. So I know you were kind of talking about attachment styles between or starting with children initially.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, what is that? I'm assuming that attachment styles can be between any type of relationship, whether it be family or love. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. There's actually this really interesting like online quiz that you can do to see what your attachment style is. And they ask questions about all different relationships in
Okay.
your life. So they ask you about family. I can't remember if they ask you about friends, but they definitely ask you about romantic
Mhm.
relationships. And I think it's interesting. So, and then they do like a little chart that plots like in family relationships, you're more this. In romantic
Ah,
relationships, you're more
I
this.
love that. Okay.
So I can give you the link to that
Yeah, for
later
sure.
on, and we can include it. That's one of the most interesting attachment quizzes that I've come across, like the most informative.
Yeah.
And I see both in myself and in my clients how their attachment styles impact all kind of areas of their life. So their
Mm.
relationships with their friends, their
Mhm.
relationships with their family, their relationships with the partner, even their relationship with work, which is really interesting.
Now, I was gonna say, now that is very interesting. I would have never thought about that. But yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. So,
Hmm.
I guess let's kind of talk about that more. So you can absolutely have a completely different attachment style depending on the person that you're in a relationship with, whether it's family or not. Is that right?
Yeah, the relationships, attachment styles tend to be stable over time. So it's unusual for you to have a completely different style from between like your parents or your family
Mhm.
and a partner. Um, but what can happen is that, like, let's say in the romantic context, that different people bring out different aspects of your attachment, right?
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
somebody who's more secure, like kind of like we were talking about before,
Mhm.
somebody who's more secure. If you're dating someone who's more secure, you're probably going to feel much less anxious and have fewer traits of anxious attachment
Yeah.
when you're dating somebody who's secure than when you're dating somebody who's avoidant, because somebody who's avoidant is going to stir up all
Mhm.
that uncomfortable stuff in you
Yeah.
and get that anxiousness activated in you. And same thing if you're avoidant and you're dating somebody who's anxious, that person's going to be like pulling for your attention and your
Mhm.
closeness, and you're going to want to push them away, whereas
Yeah.
somebody who's secure might be able to give you some more space. It is possible to have some differences in the way that you relate in romantic context than you do in other areas of your life. But for most people, that is fairly stable across different types of relationships.
Very interesting. Can your attachment style change? I know you were saying it's kind of
Yes.
stable, but can it change?
It tends to be pretty stable over time, but it absolutely can change. And that's
Okay.
one of the things that makes me the most interested in doing this kind of work with
Yeah.
people, is that it can feel, I think, for people like, oh, this is like a sentence. I'm stuck
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
I'm just always going to be this way. And that's not true at all,
Definitely.
especially if you get into a relationship with somebody whose attachment style suits you and is a good match for you. Then you, like I said before, people who date secure people tend to become more secure themselves.
Mhm.
And even in the absence, it's easiest to make that change in a relationship, but even in the absence of a relationship, work that someone does on themselves around attachment can have an impact on their attachment style as well.
I love that. Okay, so going into any type of relationship, what are the benefits of actually knowing your attachment style
Mm.
and knowing the benefits and challenges of that attachment style?
Yes. So I think knowing about attachment styles is it's both helpful when you know it for yourself, and you
Mhm.
can have a good guess of what somebody else might be too, because then you understand kind of the patterns and dynamics of what's happening
Yeah.
without making it so personal. So for
Yes.
example, and I mean there's two things. There's that, and then there's also having self-awareness around your own behaviors and
Mhm.
your own patterns and your own tendencies, so that you can do something about that if it's not working for you to get you what you actually want in
Yeah,
relationships, right?
that makes sense.
So, yeah, so if you go into a relationship, let's say, I mean, I work mostly with anxious folks who have mostly dated avoidant folks
Yeah.
because that's the common pairing.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
let's say you're an anxious person and you're going into a relationship and you're experiencing some avoidant behavior from somebody else. They might not even fully be avoidant, but they're showing you some avoidant behavior. It's much easier when you know about attachment styles to be able to see that as a pattern of that person versus
Mm,
being specific about their feelings towards you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because without that, I think it's so easy for us to go into relationships and really personalize. If somebody seemed to like us at the beginning and they start to create some distance from us, we can take that so personally and make it
Yeah.
mean that we're not good enough or they don't like us or whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
When often, actually, I think the majority of the time,
Yeah.
it's not even really about that person's feelings towards you. It's more
Yeah.
about this is how they show up in relationships, and this is how they feel about relationships in general.
Mm-hmm.
Are there exceptions to that occasionally? Sure. But
For
the
sure. Yeah.
majority of the time, people are acting out patterns that they've had over years and multiple relationships. So when you don't take it so personally, I think it's also not quite as wounding and hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
You
For
can just
sure.
see it for what it is without, making it mean something about you.
I love that. Okay. So, when and should you actually discuss attachment styles with a potential partner or with your partner?
That's a great question. Yeah, I don't see any harm in talking about it as soon as possible, as
Mhm.
soon as you feel comfortable about it, because it could provide a framework that's going to make communicating and understanding what's happening between you easier and better.
Mhm.
It's the kind of thing, I feel generally about, navigating relationship related things that, let's say you're dating someone and you introduce them to this idea, this concept, and they are not interested in it. They
Yeah.
don't, they reject
No,
it. They
thank you.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah, they don't like it, whatever. They're just not interested. It's not something I would force upon the other
Yeah.
person in a situation like that. But you can certainly use the information for your own good, for the good of the relationship.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think you can introduce it at any time and see how the other person responds to it. And if they're interested and open to it, you can go deeper into having more conversations about where each of you feel like you fall and how
Mhm.
that might impact your relationship with each other. And if they're not interested, you can just use it on your
Yeah.
side of things.
That makes sense. Okay. So, what do you want people to know in general about attachment styles and dating in general?
Mm. I think that it's helpful to know what your attachment style is, what behaviors are going to tend to go with that, and
Mhm.
who you're likely to match best with. Because I think the thing that I see become a problem for people the most is that they're dating someone who's activating they date people who activate them in a way that makes them miserable a lot of the
Yeah.
time. And because that's so familiar for people, they don't even know that they could have a different
Yeah. No
experience.
joke. No joke.
And so I just, when I read the book Attached, I'd already been a therapist for probably almost 10 years when I read
Mhm.
that book. And it was just like, light bulb for me, like, oh my gosh, this is what people are getting into. This is why they're having such a hard time. And so
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful to have that information and to use it to navigate relationships. And also because I work with mainly people who have an anxious attachment style, the other main thing that I always try to teach to people is the importance of being your actual, true, real self in
Mhm.
relationships from the very beginning. Because the other big mistake that I see people make is shutting down things about themselves to try to make themselves fit into this other person's life.
Mhm.
And then once they do, and they're in that person's life, they realize, oh, I'm in this little shell or
Yeah.
this little box that isn't actually me.
Mhm.
And it's going to be really difficult for me to be happy and free and alive and well in this relationship if I've had to shove myself into this little shell in order
Yeah.
to belong here. So it's so valuable to be your true, real, authentic self from the very beginning. And by doing that, you're going to see, oh, this person likes me, for
Mhm.
all of me, or they don't. And that's okay. I'm not going to like everybody that I meet either.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing some discerning there too. So the goal isn't to get any single person that I like to like me. It's let me get the person who actually is a good match for me, who likes me as I am, who I like them as they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the foundation of a relationship that's actually going to work.
I love that. Okay, so I know that you mentioned the quiz earlier and you just actually mentioned the book Attached. Are there any
Yes.
other resources that people can kind of learn more about this outside of you, of course, and we'll get to that in just a moment? Any
Yes.
more resources for people?
Those are the two main things that I recommend. There's tons of stuff on
Yeah.
the internet about attachment. So if you're interested in it, Google searches will bring you lots of other things, I'm sure. But I really like, there is some, I will say, there is a little bit of criticism about the book Attached because it does take a fairly negative view of avoidant attachment. So if you're avoidant, you might want to seek out actually, there is another Instagram account that I'd like to recommend, which is The Loving Avoidant.
Okay.
She also has like a Patreon community, I think. But I've actually learned a lot from her content about avoidance because they're kind of underrepresented on social
Interesting.
media, at least
Yeah.
as far as what I've come across.
Yeah.
So she has a really compassionate and kind of understanding perspective on avoidance. And I think her account also helps folks who are anxiously attached kind of have more understanding of what's going on for people who are avoidantly attached.
I love that. Okay. Well, wonderful. So I want to thank you so much for coming in. What I want to do is make sure if there's anybody out there who wants to get any help or just kind of talk to you and get more information, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram at Coaching with Keriann, and my website is the same, coachingwithkeriann.com. And I've got all the information you could ever want about what it's like to work with me, how to work with me. You'll find everything that you need there.
Wonderful. I love it. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that I've learned a lot. And just from those traits, I think I do have an anxious attachment style. So it was so interesting to kind of hear those things. And to my Next Stop Nonstop family, I want to remind you to write a review on iTunes and like, comment, and share this episode with your family and friends. Also, tag at Next Stop Nonstop in any of your comments, or if you have any topic suggestions, or if you just have a question for me. At Next Stop Nonstop can be found on all social media. Don't forget to download our free digital travel journal. That way you can use it, write, and grow wherever your adventures may take you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in with me today. All new episodes of the Next Stop Nonstop podcast will release every single Tuesday, so keep an eye out. So, until we meet again, I want to wish you all healthy minds and happy travels.